Some more reaction to this new tariff threat. And for more of that, we're joined now by Aaron O'Toole. He is a member of the Advisory Committee on Canada-U.S. Economic Relations and former leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, and currently also President and Managing Director of Addit North America, a risk management firm. Thank you so much for joining us and coming here in studio.
Good to be with you, Arthi.
Okay, so first let's talk about this new tariff that has been announced by the U.S. that came just on the heels of Canada's minister on this trade file coming home from a trip there. It kind of feels like don't let the tariff hit you on your way out.
It does have that feeling, and certainly everything related to negotiating with the Trump administration, there's posturing involved. But really, this is the response to the strike down by the U.S. Supreme Court of some of the emergency tariffs that President Trump brought in before. They were illegal. He did not have congressional authority, which he needs. So this is the next thing they're serving up. They've had these 301 investigations on a number of things to replace this sort of emergency tariff gap. And he chose forced labor, Uyghur forced labor, which is an important issue. You know, it's something that we raised when I was the conservative leader, the work camps and even the genocide of the Uyghur population in parts of China. That supply chain, we've got to make sure that that forced labor does not make it into Western supply chains. And so Canada has tried to align with the U.S. on this. They're saying we don't have enough action and enforcement. So I think we can quite easily address their concerns and push back on this 10% tariff.
Well, we know that we were talking about how there is a CUSMA exemption when it comes to these additional tariffs. Also, we heard from the Prime Minister where he said that there's an overall agreement on the objective here and that legislation could be coming in order to address it as well. But would that be enough to get trade talks back on track if this is, in fact, one of the irritants on the list of irritants that we know exists between Canada-U.S. talks when it comes to CUSMA?
It could be. The Prime Minister has alluded to legislation. There has been some form of legislation about sanctions before. He could also fill the core ombudsperson role. That role for responsible enterprise. It's called the Canadian Ombudsperson for Responsible Enterprise. The previous one, she resigned about a year ago, did several investigations into cotton and clothing that had Uyghur forced labor in it. So the fact that that position is vacant, the Prime Minister could appoint someone, sort of make a big deal out of that to say we're addressing the same concern you have, and then really get down to talking Turkey. The President has quietly changed some tariffs this week on farm and agricultural implements. He's now calling steel and aluminum critical metals. The U.S. economy is hurting because of the Iran war, the Strait of Hormuz, and tariffs. So I think there's a chance for Canada to make our case for a reduction in the 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum as part of getting back to the table with CUSMA.
In what sense do you feel that there is a pathway there? Because certainly when we look at the letter that Minister LeBlanc had issued ahead of the trip to Washington to his counterparts in the U.S. and in Mexico as well, he said that first off, Canada is for the renewal of the trade agreement, but also saying that those sectoral tariffs, discussions on that is essential. Parallel discussions on that is essential. But there doesn't seem to really be any response to that from the U.S. side. Is that something that can be put on the forefront? It is something that is very important on this side of the border.
I think it can be. If you look at who's been probably lobbying the White House the most on the sectoral tariffs, it's been the U.S. auto industry. They've been losing billions of dollars as a result of a disruption of supply chain. So the president wants to bring more manufacturing, more steel back to the United States. He's done that to a certain degree, but they don't even have the workforce to fulfill what he really envisions by having everything made in the United States. So what he needs to do is recognize Fortress America, which the Prime Minister talked about, where the supply chains in Canada and Mexico can actually help U.S. assembly be more efficient. Our critical minerals, our aluminum in Quebec, which I've often said has helped the United States since World War II. Our aluminum really helped them respond in the World War II. So we have to get back to fighting for that positioning again and letting Americans know that these tariff strategies actually cost Americans and is driving the inflationary pressures that they're seeing. So they're seeing the cost of gas skyrocketing, but everything is going up. And that's partially a result of the president's tariff agenda.
Now, I want to ask you, because you are heading to Ottawa later on today, and we know that, of course, you're part of the Prime Minister's advisory committee on economic relations with the United States. What are you guys going to be talking about as we head towards the countdown of this CUSMA review deadline? What's on the table?
Well,
Tell me.
everything we've just been talking about. Certainly, I think Mr. LeBlanc went down there to show our willingness to really lock in an agreement for the long term. Both countries need certainty. The U.S. economy needs Canada. So I think we can send that signal, but also respond to the latest pushing and posturing by the U.S., which are these forced labor, 10% tariff threats. We've got a month while they're studying this, so I think we've got time to push back and really make the case. The president's making America expensive again by tariffs. So I think if you look at the poll numbers, if you look at Americans, you look at the fact that supply chains, there's a shortage of aluminum, there's a shortage of all the things they need to build ships for the Navy, to build tanks. They can get some of this from Canada. So I think this is a time for us to really show we are the closest defense, security, and trade partner the U.S. has. So let's stop with the fighting and make a deal that's good for both countries.
I mean, this issue has been even more challenging than I think people initially thought at the onset it would be when we're talking about the trade relations with the United States, the way the negotiations have gone as well, and also just the combative somewhat nature, aggressive nature of the rhetoric, perhaps coming from the American side, I would say more so. I do want to play for you what we heard from the U.S. ambassador to Canada as he was responding to the fact that he retweeted or reposted the statement from the U.S. president calling Canada the 51st state, referring to our current economic picture entering a technical recession. So let's take a listen to that clip, and then I want your take.
The president's representative to Canada, I present the president's views, the United States views to Canada. I don't do all the reposting and retweeting myself. My understanding is we repost 100% of the president's tweets that deal with Canada.
Now, I got to say, Aaron, I was kind of taken aback by that there is some mandate to repost 100% of the tweets or social media posts put out by the U.S. president. You know, you and I were talking that you know Ambassador Hoekstra as well. What do you make of that? Him saying that, yeah, even though I am the liaison between the two countries here, I'm going to repost that, which is something that really is an irritant for Canadians, to put it lightly.
Yeah, and it's an old story. You know, I think the ambassador, with respect, can do more than just retweeting old taunts, right? You know, he actually has a good story. You know, his family was liberated in the Netherlands by Canadians, Ambassador Hoekstra, before they moved to the United States. I actually owe him lunch because we had a bet over the Dodgers Blue Jays World Series, and you know how that works. So I owe him lunch. So I hope he can remember that our critical minerals, our workers, our goods, can actually help the U.S. out of this cost of living crisis. I think if you look at the polls, his party should be saying, what are we going to do to combat this inflationary crisis? Well, leveraging your allies like Canada, like Mexico, can actually help them out of a spot. So I hope the ambassador can engage some diplomacy in a smart way and not just on Twitter.
Well, maybe you can tell him that over lunch when you take him out. You owe it to him, right?
I'll try.
Thank you again for joining us today. That is Aaron O'Toole. He is a member of the Advisory Committee on Canada-U.S. Economic Relations and, of course, former leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. He joined us here in studio. Thanks again for being here.
Thank you.